for years, conservatives have been cancelled by people on the left. And people like J.K. Rowling, Salman Rushdie, Martin Amis, Noam Chomsky said nothing. It's only now that people on the right, people on the left, are beginning to be cancelled that they've suddenly spoken up in defence of free speech. So I share that frustration. But on the other hand, I do think that it's welcome, because ultimately, the more people that stand up and object to cancel culture, the less likely it is that people will be cancelled, whether on the left or on the right.
I totally agree. The only thing that I thought lit the letter down was the negative reference to Donald Trump, because there will be a lot of supporters of Donald Trump, Toby, who feel particular fear of being cancelled.
Yes, the letter really is a letter in two parts. And in the first half, there is a certain amount of throat clearing in which the signatories virtue signal and condemn Donald Trump and express their solidarity with the claims made by the Black Lives Matter movement and so forth. And you get the impression that this is a sort of tactical positioning exercise in which they feel that if we are going to come out against cancel culture, there is a risk that we ourselves will be cancelled, and we'll set out our stall in this way at the beginning to make that less likely. It didn't really feel as sincere as the second half of the letter, which I thought was much better, in which they make a number of very strong arguments in favour of liberalism, liberal values, and against cancel culture.
What do you make of members of the left this week, Toby, like James O'Brien and Owen Jones, who have claimed that cancel culture does not exist?
Well, I would invite them to walk in my shoes for a week, Dan. When I first set up the Free Speech Union, about half a dozen people a week contacted me to tell me that they had either been cancelled or were in the process of being cancelled because they had liked the wrong tweets on Twitter, for instance. Because of that, they were being put through a disciplinary process, or they'd lost a position of some kind. Something as mild as that often, about half a dozen people a week. Since the beginning of last month, since the explosion of the BLM movement, it's increased now to about half a dozen a day. And I would predict that for every one person that is contacting me, there are at least 100 who aren't aware that the Free Speech Union is an organisation that's out there and that will stand up for them. So they're living in a different reality if they think cancel culture isn't real. And unfortunately, I think the only moment that it's going to dawn on them that it is real is when the mob comes for them, and it will come for them sooner or later because it comes for everyone.
Would you recommend J.K. Rowling signs up at the moment?
Well, I do think that J.K. Rowling, like you, I was no fan of her politics and found her, a bit irritating for many years. But I do think she is an important voice on the side of free speech, particularly in the debate between the trans lobby and gender critical feminists. And I think she's been a very strong, a very coherent, a very clear and forceful voice in that debate, standing up for the rights of gender critical feminists, merely to be heard and to express their point of view in the public square without being cancelled, without in some cases being violently attacked. And I think I welcome her contribution to that debate. And I think she's a really good voice in that debate. And if she would like to join, we, of course, would be absolutely delighted.
It's ironic, though, isn't it? Because one of the signatories of this letter felt that they were being cancelled simply for backing the letter, so now have sort of backed away from their participation, which I guess to me summed up the reason why we need to go against cancel culture. If you can be cancelled for simply signing a letter which rails against cancel culture, if you follow me.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. As you say, one of the signatories has asked for her name to be taken off because she says she didn't know who else was signing the letter, and she disapproves of the views of some of the people who've signed the letter, which is an odd reason for wanting your name to be removed. After all, no one thinks that everyone who signed the letter agrees with the views of everyone else who signed the letter, only that they agree with the sentiments expressed in the letter. But it's sort of typical somehow of cancel culture that rather than engage in the substance of an argument, they look at who's supporting it, and not only what they're saying at this particular moment, but what they've said over the course of their careers, dating back 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. If they can find any evidence that at any point even one of the signatories of this letter said something politically incorrect, then that's a reason to disregard the entire letter and cancel everyone who signed it. But in attacking the letter in this manner, or asking for their names to be withdrawn from it, and having an attack of the vapors at the last minute, they're really illustrating all the points being made by the signatories of the letter.
No, absolutely. But you're so right, because we're not allowed evolution of thought anymore, are we? Regularly, I get things that I wrote potentially 15 years ago thrown back in my face. Obviously, we see that with Boris Johnson on an almost constant basis. And it's, again, that very dangerous sort of tyranny of thought, which means that actually we can't change our views, which surely is one of the beauties and great joys of life. I mean, we've seen US presidents change parties, for example, as part of their political evolution. We don't necessarily think the same thing for our entire existence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are sort of three issues there. I mean, the first is, as you say, that people are entitled to change their views, and the fact that they may have held views you disapprove of in the past and now hold views that you approve of is not a reason to cancel them. The second point is, I think, that sometimes people misspeak. They say things in the heat of the moment that they later regret, and to cancel them for saying those things and not weigh them in the balance against all the good that the person has done, that seems quite unfair. That seems like a straightforward case of injustice, to cancel someone for one minor misstep and not take into account everything else they've done. The third thing, I think, is that when people do single out things people have said, they frequently take it out of context and in order to make it sound much worse than it actually is. Often, the thing which people are complaining of was said in a purely private capacity. It may have been said as a joke. Someone may have been exaggerating for comic effect. All of that is disregarded, and it's taken as though it was a public statement made in the public square and as an expression of this person's most sincerely held views, which is often deeply misleading. I mean, one of the issues that comes up again and again with people contacting the Free Speech Union is that someone's complained about something they said in a purely private capacity. It could be something they said in the pub that was overheard, or it could be said, they might have said it in their Instagram account to their followers on Instagram, in which they haven't advertised their connection to their university or their employer. And yet, usually someone who isn't at that university, someone who doesn't work for the same company as them, has submitted often an anonymous complaint, and then they're hauled over the coals for it by a kind of disciplinary committee. And it's, it really is, it's none of the university or the employer's business what that person's said in private or what they really meant by it. And if the complaint is anonymous, it really shouldn't be taken seriously. They shouldn't have to be put through a disciplinary process and justify something they said in the pub, in some cases, before they even joined the university or the employer in question.
Well, I think that is the biggest issue we now have, isn't it? It's corporates and it's academic institutions prepared to cut and run, prepared to throw loyal staff members or lecturers under the bus in an instant because they are so scared of negative publicity. And I don't know, Toby, how we change that.
Well, one of the reasons I think that these outrage mobs are able to end people's careers, often within 24 hours of objecting and whipping up a kind of storm of hate on social media, is because the university vice chancellors, the company CEOs, they're absolutely terrorized. They become white with fear, and they don't imagine that actually it's a small group of political activists who are good at creating the impression that they are a multitude. They mistake this tiny group of noisy, belligerent, intolerant extremists for the general public. public, and they think, oh dear, the general public objects to the fact that this person has liked this tweet on Twitter 15 years ago. We better get rid of them, because otherwise the general public will turn on us. It's not the general public. It's a tiny outrage mob, often led by politically motivated witchfinder generals who are just good at creating the impression that there are many more of them than there really are.
Indeed, absolutely indeed. And I guess we just have to keep on hoping that people like you are being listened to increasingly by the academic institutions, by the corporates. Toby Young, General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, thank you so much for being here. What do you reckon? How do we kick cancel culture to the curb? Or should we? 0344 499 1000